Do you have a tendency to get stuck in fantasy? Do you find fantasy to almost be like an addiction? In this video, I'm going to be connecting the dots between childhood PTSD, fantasy, addiction, and some things we can do to bring ourselves from the fantasy state into reality without demonizing our imagination. My name is Adam. Welcome back to my YouTube channel. Now let's talk about fantasy for a minute. It took me a long time to realize how much I used fantasy to escape. It took me a long time to realize how much fantasy was creating issues in my life. And it took me a longer time to realize that I didn't actually want to write off fantasy or my imagination, because ultimately it's an incredible gift. It's like anything, if you misuse it or if you lean too much into it at the expense of something else that's out of balance, then it becomes a problem. So as a kid, I always loved to dream. I think a lot of kids dream. I would fantasize about being on stage. I would fantasize about being a musician. I would fantasize about being in front of people. This also happened to be the thing that I was the most afraid of. And pay attention to that in your fantasies. Like, look at what your fantasies are about. What's like, this is one of the points of this video, is to look at like the mechanics underneath of what you're fantasizing about and why. What do you want from it? So for me, it was this thing of like wanting to be a performer, wanting to be in the spotlight, and also hating it. And then when I started to get into astrology and human design, etc., I found that, at least in terms of like Vedic and sidereal astrology, my North Node is Leo. And that is actually the Leo North Node lesson. It's like you really want the spotlight and you're completely terrified of it. So all of my fantasies were guiding me and were representative of my life lesson. But when we go into trauma, we have a hard time deciphering what's what in terms of anything. Another pattern that I would have very, very frequently, and has showed its face many times throughout my life, is because of my tendency to fantasize, I would project particular images upon people when I would meet them of what I wanted them to be, very, very kind of specifically with potential romantic partnerships. I always had this dream of this, very high level divine union, soulmate connection. And I would want that so much that when someone would show up, it's like I would hope that it would be that person. And so then I would start to see them as that person. And what that would do is create this very powerful magnetic field of like kind of desire and attachment and pressure that I would not intentionally put on the other person, because I was so not present and so in the attachment and in the fantasy, that fantasy and dream would tend to push people away or take me out of the moment. And so I wouldn't really be able to go step by step and really figure out what anything was. This has been a very big thing, and it leads to these big crashes of disappointment later. Now, where does this tendency to fantasize come from? Because ultimately, the fantasy it's like an addiction. The reason we tend to fantasize so much is because we're in control of our fantasies, partially. Partially, that's why. The other reason is because that's actually how you create anything, which is back to my point of not wanting to demonize it. The trick is harmonizing fantasy and reality. We fantasize because we're in control. We're in control. People do what we want them to do in our mind. We get to feel the things we want to feel in our fantasies because nothing ever goes wrong. And if it does, we can just change it in a moment. You can't do that with people. You have no idea how they're going to react. You have no idea how reality is going to respond. You have no idea what's coming around the corner tomorrow. So where does this come from? A lot of it comes from childhood trauma. A lot of the tendency to fantasize in a dissociative sort of way comes from childhood trauma. So when we experience something very difficult as kids, It separates us from the love that we naturally are and the love that we know we deserve to receive from our parents and our environment, which is an unconditional love. And so if we're not experiencing that on a human level in the moment, we get fractured or fissured and we disconnect and we start to dissociate. We start to come out of our bodies and we go into our imagination. And when we go into our imagination, basically every fantasy you ever have and anyone has ever had on some level is trying to create the feelings that they want to feel internally in their body, which essentially is just being loved in this very enormous sort of way all the time, which we all deserve to feel. We're all entitled to that. But the game of life essentially is being able to fantasize and dream about what we want and then create it. If there's too much trauma in the body, if there's too much trauma in the nervous system, what happens is reality doesn't feel at all the way our fantasies feel. And we don't like it. And we don't like it again because there was a trauma as children. But also there can be traumas simply if you're very sensitive, very empathic. Starseeds, empaths, light workers tend to be very, very sensitive and also very hyper aware of the fact that reality is created through fantasy. So when there's this sort of trauma, when there's the hypersensitivity to the reality around you, you can lean too much into this muscle. You can use it as an escape route. And then what that can lead to is a lifetime filled with nothing but disappointment. Because the fantasy essentially is a creation of an expectation for something to happen in a particular way. And underneath that is the fear and the trauma of facing what actually is. So what do? How do we begin to merge fantasy and reality? How do we begin to confront our maybe an addiction to fantasy without writing it off? This is a very large topic. I'll do more videos on this in the future, but for today, the first step is beginning to ground. It's beginning to ground into your nervous system. So the more you start to feel your body, and you can do this through somatic healing, you can do it through yoga, you can do it through breath work. There's a lot of different modalities out there, but the important thing is to bring this intense tendency to imagine and fantasize into your body. When you do that, you start to harmonize and you start to heal, and you start to heal the wounds that make reality feel so awful. Because when reality feels awful, we go into our fantasy. And that's kind of the game of life. Again, it's understanding that there's a difference between how things feel in your mind and how things feel in existence. Everybody knows like the phenomena of like imagining something and expecting something, and then when it shows up, it's like, this isn't what I thought it was going to be. No, because you don't know what it actually is going to be. That was your fantasy, your idea, your expectation. So grounding is the most important thing you can do, and healing your childhood trauma through, inner child work, family constellation, interfamily systems, meditation, however, whatever the modalities are, but through getting it into your body. Number 2, begin to experiment and become aware of the difference in how you think something is going to feel versus how it actually does feel, and be willing to feel the discomfort of reality. Because if you don't do this, if you don't become conscious of this, you will go through life again and again and again and again and again, creating nothing but disappointment simply because you're not taking ownership of how things feel in truth. You're operating on this unconscious sort of fairy world autopilot. And the only way to start to merge the two is look at situations, look at what you thought something was going to feel like beforehand, and then when you're in the moment or after the scenario, event, or whatever, look at how it actually felt. and look at what you didn't like about it. What didn't you like about it and why? Were you afraid? Like, were you, like, for example, for me, like, I'll have all these fantasies about performing. And then if I go perform, it's fun, but it doesn't feel the way it felt in my head. This is a pattern I've had my whole life because I have a lot of social anxiety. In my head, I don't have the social anxiety and the fantasy, but in reality, I have it. And then on top of that, like, things don't always go the way I want them to go. People don't respond the way I want them to respond. And as we accept this more and more and more, then we have less attachment to the outcome. And then we actually enjoy the moment more because it's the fear of the outcome that also leads to the disappointment. And what is the next thing you can do just for today? Well, this kind of goes hand in hand with the first two. Start to write out your expectations of things. See, one of the things that kills us is, especially with, I mean, the expectation and fantasy are connected. But when we have fantasies about something or how something's going to go, we are unconsciously, whether we realize it or not, developing enormous expectations. And if we don't pay attention to what our expectations are, we're going to be disappointed automatically. You'll be disappointed even if you know what they are, but not anywhere near as much because they kind of surprise you. And then you just feel this emotion of like devastation and you don't even really know why, because most people are not fully conscious of what's going on in their mind or their emotions or their body. So like if you have an event coming up and you're really excited and you really hope for something, before you go, write out, what are you expecting? And is this realistic or not? This is some of this I got from Brene Brown's Atlas of the Heart. It's a really good book. I recommend it. Write out what you were expecting and is it realistic? Because we have a tendency to like fantasize and expect things that are impossible. You know, like if you were going to an event to like socialize a little bit, were you expecting, like within the first hour, to meet the absolute love of your life and have them walk up to you and profess their love, and all of a sudden you have this massive soul connection and within 3 days you're getting married? Like, this is what the fantasy starts to create. That's not realistic. And so then no matter what happens, you're going to be disappointed. Even if you meet your soulmate, it's not going to go the way you thought it was going to go, and you're going to be like, oh, this is bullshit. I don't like this person, and you're going to push them away. Write out your expectations and then determine whether they're realistic or not. And if they are realistic, still be aware that they may not happen. But when you're aware of what they are and you're very clear on it, it's much easier to just be like, okay, that didn't go the way I thought it was going to go, and it's okay, because it's the mind can see it. And the last thing I would say for today is, don't demonize fantasy. Understand that your tendency to fantasize and to imagine is an absolute superpower. It's the biggest superpower on the planet. It's how everything happens. It's how everything is created. It's not that you want to like throw this thing away. You want to learn how to work with it. You know, it's like if you fantasize and you make up stories all the time and you just sit on your bed or in your room and you never do anything with it, that can become kind of a little sad. Write them down. Write a book. Do something that brings that into reality. It's like, it's about understanding it's a gift and then asking, what is it that you can do with this ability that can bring things into realness? Fantasy and imagination are the most important part of healing, because your whole past, no matter how brutally traumatic it was, is still on some level a story. And you can't necessarily change what's going on in the moment if you're in a horrible, event or trauma, but later you can go back with your imagination and tell a different story. And when you're connected to your body gets the new story and it creates the new story. And the trauma starts to dissipate. Most people don't know how to do this. This is how you begin to heal. But you want to tell the new story in connection with your body, your mind, your emotions, all of it. So do not demonize fantasy. This is about learning how to use it. Let me know how that goes. Please like and subscribe to the channel. Let me know if you have any questions, revelations, or breakthroughs, or anything else you want to hear on this particular topic. It's a very big topic, specifically for me. Other than that, thank you so much. I look forward to next time. Bye.